Honorable Chairpersons and members of the Joint Committee, I appear before you today to vehemently oppose the Protection of Sovereignty Bill 2026 in its entirety. While cloaked in the language of patriotism, a careful legal analysis reveals that this bill suffers from fatal constitutional defects, including unjustifiable limitations on the fundamental rights, dangerous vagueness, and an unconstitutional subversion of the multi-party dispensation. In our current political climate, where the state keeps persecuting people and state persecution has forced opposition leaders and critics out of the country, this bill ceases to be a theoretical threat. It is an immediate existential danger to political pluralism, economic survival, and Uganda's standing in the global community. To appreciate the gravity of this bill, I invite the committee to examine the chilling day-to-day realities that this law will create across all sectors of Uganda if passed. 1. Reclassifying Ugandan citizens as foreigners. The most insidious provision is hidden in Clause 1, which defines a foreigner to include B, a Ugandan citizen residing outside Uganda. There are numerous Ugandans who live in the diaspora, and they remit over $2.5 billion US annually to our country. All these citizens are going to be deemed foreigners by this law. When did this government cease to care about its citizens to the extent of regarding them as non-citizens? Consider a political leader born in Uganda, a registered voter, and a duly elected party president who is forced into exile or out of the country due to state persecution. Under Clause 1B, the moment that citizen crosses the border to save their life, that law strips them of their Ugandan identity and reclassifies them as a foreigner. Because Clause 1 defines an agent of a foreigner as anyone who acts under the direction or control of a foreigner, and Clause 2.2a says the act applies to anyone who engages in political activities, for or in the interests of a foreigner. The domino effect is devastating, Honorable Chair and members. Imagine a party official in Kampala receives a WhatsApp voice note from this party president who is out of the country, instructing them to coordinate some party activities. Under this bill, by following those instructions, the party official here in Uganda is guilty of engaging in political activities for a foreigner who left the country. Under Clause 14, they face 10 years in prison. Under Clause 5.4, they face 20 years in prison. A local party administrator or aide, simply doing their job by taking instructions from their leader, becomes a felon. Let me talk about the direct assault on the Political Parties Act and the multi-party dispensation. Articles 71 and 72 of our country's constitution, the grand norm, guarantee the freedom to form political parties, operationalized by the Political Parties and Organizations Act. The bill violently contradicts this act. Millions of Ugandans live abroad. Suppose a Ugandan doctor working in London pays $100 US, roughly 380,000 Uganda shillings, into the bank account of his local political party in Kampala as membership dues. Because the doctor in London is considered a foreigner under Clause 1B, the local party treasurer has just received foreign funding. If this pushes the party's annual foreign funding to over 20,000 currency points without the minister's approval, the treasurer of that political party faces 20 years in prison under Clause 22, and the funds are forfeited to the state. This is not right. By placing a cap on foreign money, which includes diaspora remittances to parties, the Minister of Internal Affairs is handed an absolute veto over opposition party financing. If the minister dislikes an opposition party, he simply refuses the written approval for their diaspora funding. The party is financially suffocated by state fiat, directly violating our country's constitution. Let me talk about the unconstitutional overbreadth and vagueness of this law, this bill. The legislative drafting of the bill fails the constitutional test against vagueness, granting the executive arbitrary power to punish dissent. There's the catch-all foreigner. Clause 1E allows the minister to declare any person, institution, or body a foreigner. Suppose a local trade union stages a strike demanding higher wages, embarrassing the government. The minister can simply sign a statutory instrument declaring that trade union a foreigner. Overnight, the union leaders become unregistered agents of a foreigner and they face immediate arrest. How can this be right? Clause 22H states that the act applies to anyone who influences the public to oppose the policy of government. As the leader of the opposition, my literal duty and the team that I work with is to oppose government policy that is injurious to the citizenry and offer alternative policy positions, which we do every so often. A local civil society group running a radio talk show explaining why a new tax is harmful could be jailed for 20 years. That's problematic. I bring in one or two examples, the Russian and Chinese blueprint, importing authoritarian toolkits. This bill that we are discussing is a copy and paste of the most oppressive foreign laws adopted to liquidate any opposition to government. The Russian precedent. Russia's foreign agent law, which is mirrored in our clause 21, was used to stigmatize NGOs and jail opposition figures like Vladimir Karamazov for 25 years for opposing government policy. Clause 5.4 imports Moscow's playbook to Kampala. There's also the Chinese precedent. Clause 3.2 designates a department responsible for peace and security, that is ISO, as the entity to register agents of foreigners. This mimics China's overseas NGO law, which placed the Ministry of State Security in charge of all NGOs. Handing ISO, in our case, this power means opposition politicians and NGO workers, many of whom I see in this room, will not face auditors. They will face intelligence operatives. Now, let me talk about decimating the NGO sector and humanitarian response. Clause 22 restricts foreign funding to 400 million Uganda shillings annually without ministerial approval. Clause 7.4 makes it a crime, which could fetch one 20 years in jail for an agent of a foreigner to develop a policy without cabinet approval. Consider a local NGO fighting HIV and AIDS. They rely on partnerships with the Global Fund or World Health Organization, which are defined as foreigners under Clause 1. If local doctors sit down with these partners to draft a new national HIV treatment policy and present it to the Ministry of Health without first getting cabinet approval, the local doctors will have committed an offense under Clause 7.4 and could face 20 years in jail. There's the global precedent of India and Ethiopia. India used one of its laws to cancel the licenses of 20,000 NGOs, including Amnesty International, causing a massive collapse in humanitarian aid. Ethiopia's similar law decimated its civil society before they were forced to repeal it. Uganda cannot afford to scare away every international health, education, and refugee support organization, because that's what this bill would be doing. Economic self-sabotage leading to mass unemployment, scaring off foreign investors, and hurting Uganda's brand. Beyond politics, Honorable Chair and members, this bill is an economic suicide note. It creates a hostile environment for capital and labor, directly worsening the severe economic pain already biting Ugandans. That's why I'm calling it an economic suicide note. Legislative cruelty in the face of the USAID crisis. Honorable members, we are currently reeling from the recent withdrawal of the USAID support, which has pushed thousands of Ugandan health workers, implementers, and NGO staff into immediate unemployment. Families are failing to pay school fees, mortgages are defaulting. In this exact moment of crisis, this bill proposes to classify every remaining foreign donor as a foreigner, capping their funding at just 20,000 currency points without a minister's stamp, and threaten local NGO staff with 20 years in prison. To pass this bill now is an act of legislative cruelty. It guarantees that the European Union, Gavi, the Global Fund, and private foundations will look at the 20-year jail terms for local staff and withdraw entirely to avoid legal liability. That's what will happen. The thousands already rendered jobless by US aid will have absolutely no hope of being reabsorbed into the sector. This bill will deepen the unemployment crisis exponentially. Criminalizing the private sector and foreign investors. A foreign mining company or manufacturing plant operating in Uganda is a foreigner under Clause 1D. Under Clauses 7 and 10, if that company's local Ugandan CEO or legal counsel advocates to a ministry for a specific regulatory framework, for example, tax breaks for manufacturing, they are deemed to be influencing the development of government policy on behalf of a foreigner. They face 20 years in prison. No serious foreign investor will bring capital to a country where legal advocacy for their business interests is criminalized as foreign interest and interference. Stigmatizing every Ugandan in formal employment. Clause 1 defines an agent of a foreigner as an employee or servant of a foreigner. This means every Ugandan working for MTN, Standard Chartered Bank, Toyota Uganda, the UN, or any foreign embassy is technically an agent of a foreigner. Under Clause 14, they must register with the ISO. If their employer inadvertently runs afoul of these vague regulations, the Ugandan employee will go to prison for 10 years. To mitigate this massive legal liability, foreign companies will simply stop hiring Ugandans in senior roles or pack up and leave entirely, destroying Uganda's brand abroad. We are currently, as a country, negotiating with the IMF for debt relief and positioning Uganda as an investment hub. If this bill passes, global headlines will read, Uganda passes Russian-style foreign agent law, jails citizens for talking to exiles. Investors do not read the fine print of our clauses. They look at the headlines and move their billions to Kenya, to Rwanda, or Tanzania, or elsewhere. This bill makes Uganda look like a rogue state, and it pains me to say that, jeopardizing our trade preferences under AGOA and the EU. Let me address gagging the media and paralyzing the financial sector. This bill weaponizes vague economic and security terms to paralyze banks and silence journalists. Clause 13 criminalizes economic sabotage, publishing information that weakens or damages the economic system. Suppose an investigative journalist publishes evidence that a senior government official stole 50 million US dollars from the National Treasury. International investors panic and the shilling drops. Under this bill, the government can arrest this journalist for economic sabotage and jail them for 20 years. The crime of this journalist becomes exposing the theft, not committing it. And yet we should be encouraging everybody who has capacity to expose corruption and to bring it to the fore such that it gets punished. After all, the IGG told us we lose 10 trillion shillings to corruption every year. That's money we should plow back into the economy. Weaponizing commercial banks. Clause 25 dictates that a bank cannot pay out money to an agent or foreigner without proof of ministerial approval. If a bank fails to do this, they face a civil penalty of 200,000 currency points. That's 4 billion shillings. No bank CEO will risk this. They will preemptively freeze the accounts of opposition figures, NGOs, and media houses out of fear. The state won't need court orders to freeze opposition accounts. The bank will do it for them, given this law. Let me end with legal redundancy. We seem to be trying to solve a non-existent problem. The memorandum of the bill falsely claims that there is no specific law upholding the sovereignty of the country. Legally, this legislation is entirely redundant. If a foreign embassy tries to fund a violent coup, for example, the Penal Code Act already criminalizes treason, which is punishable by death. If someone launders illicit foreign money, the Anti-Money Laundering Act already mandates declarations of source of funds. If foreign funding goes to government institutions, the Public Finance Management Act already strictly regulates that. If NGOs, many of whom are in this room, flout the law, the NGO Act already provides for a framework of sanctions. The only gap this bill fills is the loophole that currently prevents the state from classifying an exiled Ugandan opposition leader as a foreigner, to bypass the Political Parties Act and jail their local supporters. The conclusion and prayer. Honorable chairpersons and honorable colleagues, as you draft your report, I entreat you to visualize the kind of Uganda this bill creates. A Uganda where a citizen out of the country is stripped of their nationality. A Uganda where a party treasurer goes to Luzira for receiving membership dues from a Ugandan in Saudi Arabia. A Uganda where thousands of already unemployed US aid workers watch their remaining colleagues flee the country rather than face 20 years in jail. A Uganda where a foreign investor's local lawyer goes to prison for drafting a policy memo. A Uganda where international NGOs flee, taking our healthcare and refugee support with them. Passing this bill will not protect Uganda's sovereignty. It will kill the multi-party dispensation, plunge thousands more Ugandans into absolute poverty, chase away foreign investment, and turn our country into an international pariah. And I hasten to add, clearly this bill is intending to stifle dissent. This government, in my view, should be excited to receive criticism from political leaders, from civil society organizations, from members of the general public, because they are all stakeholders. When we say healthcare is grappling, when we say there is corruption, that should not be a bad thing that warrants a whole bill to try and stifle that dissent. Government should listen to those concerns of Ugandan people so that it can improve, so that the taxpayer money that is given to government is put to good use. Any serious government should have that at the back of their minds, as opposed to finding ways to shut people up. That's not right. In light of the foregoing, I respectfully pray that your joint committee recommends the total rejection of the Protection of Sovereignty Bill 2026 in its entirety.